They made fun of my uniform. They looked past the medals on my chest. Some even called me a disgrace. Nobody knew the full story until the president stood up, gave me a salute, and told them exactly who I was. Why did the president salute me? My hands trembled, clutching the phone that brought the news. A White House ceremony. For years, my family had dismissed my military career as worthless, laughing at my uniform, ignoring my medals, and labeling me the family disappointment. They had no idea about the classified mission that changed everything, and they were about to learn the truth from the most powerful man in the world. I grew up in a pristine colonial house in suburban Boston, where success was strictly measured by academic achievements and prestigious degrees. My father, Dr. William Mitchell, was the dean of economics at a renowned university, and my mother, Dr. Margaret Mitchell, had made her name as a research scientist in biochemistry. My older brother, Ethan, followed their footsteps perfectly, graduating top of his class before joining a blue-chip law firm. The Mitchell family had a reputation, and everyone played their part, everyone except me. From my earliest memories, I was expected to pursue medicine at an Ivy League university. My parents had it all mapped out: science camps every summer, tutors for perfect grades, introductions to their colleagues' children who were already on the right path. My bedroom walls weren't adorned with celebrity posters, but with human anatomy charts and periodic tables. But something else captured my imagination when I was 9, my grandfather, my dad's father. He had served as a combat medic in World War II. While my parents rarely spoke of his service, preferring to highlight his later career as a hospital administrator, I was fascinated by the few stories he shared when we were alone. I wasn't saving the world in some fancy lab, Riley, he'd tell me, his eyes distant with memories. I was saving it one soldier at a time, right there in the mud and blood. He showed me his medic badge once, explaining how he treated wounded men under fire in France. That badge meant more to me than all the academic trophies in our family's display cabinet. In high school, I was good, but not stellar academically. I maintained a solid B+ average while excelling in athletics, particularly track and swimming. My guidance counselor said I could aim for good schools, maybe not Harvard or Yale, but respectable institutions with strong pre-med programs. My parents, however, couldn't hide their disappointment at my SAT scores. "Your brother had perfect scores," my mother constantly reminded me. He had his pick of schools. When college application season arrived, I dutifully applied to my parents' chosen schools. The rejection letters came one by one. I was waitlisted at 2 and accepted at 3 less prestigious universities. My parents' disappointment was palpable. "We'll make it work," my father said with a sigh that conveyed exactly how much of a failure he considered me. "State school for undergrad, then maybe you can transfer somewhere better." That spring, a military recruiter visited our high school. While my classmates ignored the Army table, I found myself drawn to it. The recruiter, a woman named Sergeant Amanda Wallace, spoke about serving with purpose, about medical roles in the military, about becoming part of something bigger than yourself. For the first time, I saw a path that called to me. At 19, after one miserable semester at the state university my parents had reluctantly accepted, I made my decision. I enlisted in the United States Army with a specialty track for combat medicine. When I told my family over dinner, the reaction was worse than I'd imagined. "The military?" My father nearly choked on his wine. "The military is for people who can't make it elsewhere." "Is that what you think of yourself, Riley?" My mother covered her face with her hands. "Where did we go wrong with you? We gave you every opportunity." But it was my brother Ethan's response that cut deepest. He laughed, actually laughed. "Playing soldier, Riley, really? You know they'll just stick you in some office filing papers, right? This isn't some movie where you'll be saving lives on the battlefield." "I'm going to be a combat medic," I said firmly, though my voice shook. "Like Grandpa. Your grandfather became something respectable after the war," my father countered. "He didn't waste his potential." That night, I sat on my childhood bed, looking at the acceptance letter from the university and my enlistment papers. By morning, my decision was firm. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus to basic training, my parents' disapproval and my brother's mockery following me like shadows. Basic training tested me in ways I'd never imagined. The physical demands were intense, but the mental challenges were even greater. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being measured against my brilliant family, but against my own potential. Drill sergeants didn't care about my SAT scores or my family's academic pedigree. They cared about my determination, my teamwork, my ability to perform under pressure. And I thrived. I finished near the top of my basic training class and moved on to advanced individual training for combat medicine. There, I found my calling. The instructors noticed my focus and dedication. One told me, "Mitchell, you've got the hands and the head for this work. More importantly, you've got the heart." When I came home for my first Christmas in uniform, I thought things might be different. I'd graduated with honors from my training programs. I had ribbons on my chest and pride in my posture. But nothing had changed. "When will you be done playing dress up?" My mother asked as I helped her prepare dinner. The uniform looks cute, my brother said with a smirk, but let's be honest, you're probably just handing out aspirin at some clinic. They asked no questions about my training, showed no interest in what I'd learned or accomplished. My father changed the subject every time I mentioned the army. By the time I returned to base, I understood that my family would never see value in the path I'd chosen. I would have to find that validation elsewhere. My training as a combat medic was intense and all-consuming. We learned to start IVs while wearing chemical protective gear, to apply tourniquets in the dark, to assess patients under simulated gunfire. The instructors pushed us beyond what we thought were our limits, then pushed us further. In combat, you don't get second chances, they reminded us daily. Your training has to be perfect, because the battlefield doesn't allow for mistakes. I discovered I had natural abilities that surprised even me. My hands remained steady during high-stress scenarios. I could memorize protocols quickly and apply them under pressure. My shooting qualified as expert level, and my physical fitness scores ranked among the top in my unit. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. I was carving my own path. Upon completing my medical training, I was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division and soon received orders for Afghanistan. Before deployment, I called my parents, hoping they might show some concern or support. Afghanistan, my mother said, her voice flat. I suppose that was inevitable with your career choice. Just keep your head down, my father added. No heroics. There was no be safe or we're proud of you. No care packages followed me overseas. No supportive letters arrived while my fellow soldiers received mail from home. But in Afghanistan, I found a different kind of family. My squad became the support system I never had. We shared our fears during long nights on guard duty, celebrated birthdays with makeshift cakes from MRE ingredients, and protected each other during missions outside the wire. Sergeant Lisa Jackson, our squad leader, became the mentor I'd always craved, tough but fair, demanding excellence while acknowledging achievement. 3 months into my deployment, our convoy hit an improvised explosive device. The blast flipped the lead vehicle, seriously wounding 2 soldiers inside. Without hesitation, I ran to the smoking wreckage, my medical bag clenched against my chest. Enemy fire crackled around us as I dragged Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper from the vehicle and began treatment. His femoral artery was severed, blood pulsing onto the dusty road. Stay with me, Cooper, I urged as I applied a combat tourniquet and started in 4 under fire. The medevac helicopter arrived 14 minutes later, 14 minutes, during which I kept him alive through manual pressure, fluids, and sheer determination. Captain Michael Williams witnessed my actions that day. Mitchell, you have ice in your veins, he told me afterward. Cooper would be dead if not for you. Word of the incident traveled up the chain of command. I received an Army Commendation Medal with a V device for valor. When I called home to share the news, my mother responded, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Ethan made junior partner at his firm?" As months passed, I grew into my role. I treated everything from battle wounds to common illnesses, earning respect from infantry soldiers who typically viewed support personnel with skepticism. I was promoted to sergeant ahead of schedule based on my performance. My commanding officer noted in my evaluation that I displayed exceptional medical skills under combat conditions and leadership beyond her years. During my 18-month deployment, I saved 11 lives in direct combat situations. Each time I stabilized a wounded soldier long enough for evacuation, I felt a purpose so clear and powerful that my family's disapproval seemed increasingly irrelevant. When my brother Ethan graduated from law school during my deployment, my parents threw an elaborate party. They flew me home on leave for the occasion, seemingly more to maintain appearances than from any desire to see me. The contrast between my daily reality and their privileged bubble struck me immediately. At the party, I stood awkwardly in a corner as relatives and family friends fawned over Ethan. My dress uniform drew curious glances, but few questions. When my uncle finally asked about my service, my father quickly interrupted. "Riley's doing fine with her Army experience," he said dismissively. "But today is about Ethan's achievement. Did you know he graduated 3rd in his class?" Later that evening, my mother noticed the ribbons on my uniform. "What are those colorful things for?" she asked, as if they were costume jewelry rather than symbols of service and sacrifice. "This one is for combat medical service," I explained. "This is my commendation medal with valor device." "Fascinating," she interrupted, clearly uninterested. "Have you met Cousin Allison? She just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. Now that's a proper medical career." I returned to my unit the next day, the emotional distance between my family and me growing wider than the physical miles. My second deployment loomed on the horizon, this time to a particularly volatile region. Intelligence reports suggested heavy enemy activity, and our pre-deployment briefings were sobering. The night before departing, I made one last attempt to connect with my family. I called home, hoping for some word of encouragement. "We're about to deploy to a pretty dangerous area," I said carefully. "I just wanted to talk before we ship out." Try not to play hero over there, my father replied. The real heroes are the ones who come home and do something meaningful with their lives. I should go, I said, fighting back tears. We have an early start tomorrow. Email when you can, my mother said perfunctorily. Oh, and your brother's engagement party is next month. We'll send pictures. As I hung up, I realized I was truly on my own. Whatever validation or recognition I sought would never come from the Mitchell family. That night, I wrote a letter to myself to be opened if I didn't make it back. You chose a path with purpose. Whatever happens, remember that your worth isn't measured by their understanding. 6 months into my second deployment, I was unexpectedly transferred to a special operations medical support team. My commanding officer had recommended me based on my performance in several high-pressure situations. The selection process was rigorous. Physical tests that pushed me to my limits, medical scenarios that required split-second decisions, psychological evaluations to ensure I could handle the stress of classified operations. This isn't standard combat medicine, Sergeant Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel James Davis explained during my briefing. You'll be operating with small teams in high-risk environments with minimal support. The missions are classified, and the margin for error is zero. My training with a special operations team was unlike anything I'd experienced before. We practiced medical procedures while sleep-deprived, performed surgeries in simulated moving vehicles, and learned advanced techniques not taught in standard combat medicine courses. The elite operators I trained alongside were consummate professionals who valued competence over gender or background. For the first time, I felt completely judged on my abilities alone. On April 15th, our team received intelligence about American hostages being held in a remote mountain compound. 3 aid workers had been captured 2 weeks earlier, and intelligence suggested they would be moved within 48 hours, likely to be executed on camera. Our 12-person team, including myself as the only medic, was tasked with their extraction. The mission briefing was tense. Satellite imagery showed a heavily guarded compound in mountainous terrain. The plan called for a night insertion by helicopter, a precision raid on the compound, and immediate extraction with the hostages. As the team medic, I would remain with the helicopter until the assault team secured the hostages, then move in to provide immediate care if needed. These hostages have likely been mistreated, I told the team during our medical briefing. Expect dehydration, malnutrition, possibly torture. Injuries. Our priority is stabilization for transport. We launched just after midnight, 2 Black Hawk helicopters cutting through the moonless night. The team was silent, each person mentally preparing for what lay ahead. I checked my medical bags one final time, ensuring every piece of equipment was accessible by touch alone. Captain Aaron Davis, our team leader, caught my eye and nodded. No words were necessary. 20 minutes from the target, disaster struck. Warning systems blared as the lead helicopter took ground fire. The pilot, Major Samantha Reynolds, fought to maintain control as hydraulic systems failed. I braced as the helicopter spiraled downward, making a hard emergency landing in a narrow valley 3 miles from our objective. The impact threw me against the cabin wall, dazing me momentarily. When my vision cleared, I saw smoke filling the cabin and heard the groans of injured personnel. Training took over. I moved to the cockpit where Major Reynolds was slumped over the controls, blood streaming from a head wound. The co-pilot, Lieutenant James Wilson, had a compound fracture of his left arm. We need to move, Captain Davis shouted over the noise of the second helicopter circling protectively overhead. Hostiles are converging on our position. I stabilized Major Reynolds' neck while we extracted her from the cockpit, applied a pressure dressing to her head wound, and administered pain medication. For Lieutenant Wilson, I quickly splinted his arm and gave him injectable morphine. As gunfire erupted around us, I helped drag both pilots to defensive positions behind nearby rocks. Second helo can't land, Davis reported. Too much enemy fire. We're on our own until they can clear an LZ. Within minutes, we were surrounded. Our team of 12, 2 seriously injured, faced an estimated 30 hostile fighters. I divided my attention between returning fire and monitoring the injured pilots. When Specialist Thomas Rivera took a bullet to his thigh, I crawled through the firefight to reach him. Pressure here, I instructed, guiding his hands to the wound while I prepared a tourniquet. Enemy rounds kicked up dirt inches from us as I worked. For 4 hours, we held our position, ammunition running dangerously low. I moved between the wounded, changing dressings, administering fluids, and maintaining airways. When Master Sergeant Derek Phillips was hit in the chest, the bullet narrowly missing his heart, I performed an emergency needle decompression for his collapsed lung, using a pen light clenched between my teeth to see. Mitchell, Captain Davis called out. We need coordinates for an airstrike. You're the only one with a line of sight to the enemy's main position. I crawled to the edge of our defensive perimeter, exposing myself to enemy fire to get the necessary visual. A bullet grazed my helmet as I called in precise coordinates over the radio. Minutes later, the thunder of fighter jets preceded an explosion that silenced half the enemy positions. As night gave way to dawn, our situation deteriorated further. Major Reynolds' condition was worsening, and we had 3 more wounded team members. When enemy fighters flanked our position, a grenade exploded near me, sending shrapnel into my left leg. The pain was immediate and intense, but there was no time to address it. Sergeant Kyle Bennett was critically wounded in the same blast. Despite my injury, I dragged him 20 yards to better cover, applied a chest seal to his sucking wound, and started in 4 while using my body to shield him from incoming fire. "Stay with me, Bennett," I urged, watching his oxygen saturation drop on my portable monitor. "Your kids need you to fight." By noon, enemy reinforcements had arrived. Captain Davis made the difficult decision to split our team. "Mitchell, you take the 4 most wounded and head east toward that ridgeline. The rest of us will create a diversion. Second Hello will extract you there." I organized the evacuation, creating improvised stretchers for Major Reynolds and Sergeant Bennett. My leg throbbed with every step as I led our small group through rugged terrain, constantly checking the wounded. We traveled through the night, evading enemy patrols, my medical supplies dwindling with each treatment. 48 hours after the crash, we reached the extraction point. The relief I felt seeing the helicopter approach was indescribable. As we lifted off, I finally allowed myself to examine my own wound. The shrapnel had torn through muscle, but missed major blood vessels, painful but not life-threatening. Back at base, I learned the remainder of our team had been extracted hours after us. The mission had been aborted, the hostages still in enemy hands. What I didn't know then was that the intelligence we gathered during those harrowing hours, specifically information I'd radioed about enemy positions and numbers, would prove crucial in a subsequent rescue operation that freed not only our original targets, but 24 additional hostages. Due to the classified nature of the operation, my actions received no public recognition. My injury earned me a Purple Heart, and a commendation was placed in my file, but the full story remained known only to those with appropriate clearance. When I called home from the hospital, my family seemed more inconvenienced than concerned by news of my injury. "So will this affect your contract with the Army?" my father asked. "Perhaps it's a sign you should consider a different direction." "It's just a leg wound," I replied, too tired to feel the hurt anymore. "I'll be back with my unit in a few weeks." The physical wound healed, leaving a jagged scar down my left thigh. The emotional scars, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the guilt over Sergeant Bennett, who didn't survive despite my efforts, were slower to fade. Yet through it all, I knew with absolute certainty that I had found my purpose. In those desperate hours, I had saved 15 lives through direct medical intervention. What I couldn't know was how many more would be saved because of what we'd accomplished. After 3 months of physical rehabilitation for my leg injury, I was granted 30 days of medical leave. The doctors had done their part, repairing the muscle damage and ensuring I regained full mobility. What they couldn't repair were the invisible wounds, the way I startled at sudden noises, the nightmares that left me gasping for breath, the moments when my mind transported me back to that valley of death. The mission remained classified. I could tell no one about those 48 hours, not even the therapist who tried to help me process the trauma. "I can't discuss the details," I repeated in session after session. "I just need to learn to live with what happened." I approached my family visit with a mixture of hope and dread. Despite everything, some childish part of me still craved their understanding, their recognition that my path had value. I'd received a Purple Heart and a confidential letter of commendation from a general. Maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. My parents' house looked exactly the same: pristine lawn, gleaming windows, achievement awards prominently displayed in the living room. My brother Ethan was visiting with his new fiancée, Charlotte, a tax attorney he'd met at his firm. My mother had organized a dinner to celebrate their engagement, apparently forgetting I was arriving the same day. "Oh, Riley," she said when I appeared at the door, my uniform pressed perfectly, my Purple Heart prominent among my ribbons. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. We're having a little celebration for Ethan and Charlotte." "You told me to come today," I reminded her, already feeling like an intruder. "But it's fine. I'm happy to meet Charlotte." The dinner was excruciating. My parents and brother dominated the conversation with stories about Ethan's successes, the prestigious cases he was handling, and their elaborate wedding plans. Charlotte occasionally tried to include me, asking polite questions about my service, but my father intercepted each attempt. "Riley's just doing a stint in the military," he explained dismissively. "Nothing as interesting as your corporate law work." When Charlotte noticed my Purple Heart and asked about it, my mother actually rolled her eyes. "She got a minor injury during some training exercise," she said. "The military gives out medals for everything these days." "It wasn't a training exercise," I corrected, my voice tight. "And the Purple Heart is specifically for wounds received in combat against enemy forces." "Combat?" My brother scoffed. "Come on, Riley, you're a glorified nurse. You probably tripped over a tent stake or something. Something inside me snapped. Years of dismissal, of having my service devalued, of being treated as less than, it all boiled to the surface. I was wounded by enemy fire while treating injured soldiers, I said quietly, dangerously. I spent 48 hours evading enemy combatants while keeping 4 critically wounded teammates alive. One of them died in my arms despite everything I did. The table fell silent. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, if you had gone to medical school like we wanted, he said finally, you could be saving lives in a proper hospital instead of playing war hero. Playing? The word hung in the air. You think I'm playing? What your father means, my mother interjected, is that there are more respectable ways to practice medicine. Your cousin Allison is a wonderful doctor. Yes, I know, I finished. You've mentioned her accomplishments approximately 47 times since I joined the army. Ethan smirked. Someone sensitive. Look, we all know you enlisted because you couldn't hack it academically. There's no shame in admitting that. I stood up slowly, my hands flat on the table to hide their trembling. In the past 5 years, I've saved more lives than I can count. I've performed emergency procedures under enemy fire that most hospital doctors will never attempt in their careers. I've earned the respect of some of the most elite soldiers in our military. And not once, have any of you asked me about what I actually do. My mother had the grace to look uncomfortable. We just worry that you're wasting your potential. Do you even tell your friends what I do? I asked suddenly. Do you mention to your university colleagues that your daughter serves in the army? Or am I such a disappointment that you pretend I don't exist? The flicker in my father's eyes told me everything. The military is a perfectly respectable temporary career, he said stiffly. We just always expected more from you. Expected more? I laughed bitterly. I've been shot at, blown up, and operated on dying men with nothing but basic supplies in my training. I've held soldiers' hands as they took their last breaths. I've written letters to parents explaining how brave their children were in their final moments. What exactly were you expecting from me that would be more than that? A real career, my father snapped. A respectable position in society, not playing soldier in the desert. You've always been the family disappointment, Riley. The military was just your way of running from that fact. The words hit like physical blows. Family disappointment. Even though I'd heard the sentiment before, having it stated so explicitly tore something open inside me. I walked out without another word, ignoring my mother's half-hearted call to come back. In my rental car, parked in their perfect driveway beside their luxury vehicles, I finally allowed myself to break down. The tears came in racking sobs that shook my entire body. All the stress, trauma, and rejection poured out at once. My phone rang, not my family, but Staff Sergeant Monica Torres, my closest friend from my unit. Hey, Mitchell, just checking in on your leave. How's the leg? How's the family reunion going? I couldn't speak, could only manage choked sobs. I'm on my way, she said immediately. Text me the address. Don't move. 2 hours later, Torres arrived at the hotel where I'd checked in after fleeing my parents' house. She sat with me through the night as I finally talked about everything. The mission, the losses, the family who could never understand. Your worth isn't determined by people who don't understand what you do, she told me fiercely. It's determined by the lives you've saved, the soldiers who trust you with their lives, the missions you've made possible. When my leave ended, I returned to base with a request for reassignment. I needed distance, not just from the trauma of that mission, but from the deeper wound of family rejection. As I boarded the plane back to base, I felt lower than I had even in those desperate hours behind enemy lines. At least then, I had known my purpose. My reassignment came through quicker than expected. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center needed experienced combat medics to support their Wounded Warrior program. The position would allow me to use my field experience to help injured soldiers through their recovery process. It also meant I would be stationed within driving distance of Washington, D.C., far enough from Boston to avoid casual family visits, but close enough if a real emergency arose. At Walter Reed, I found renewed purpose. The wounded warriors I worked with understood what I'd been through in ways my family never could. Many had served in similar operations, faced similar dangers. We spoke the same language, recognized the same nightmares. Captain James Rodriguez, who had lost both legs to an IED, became one of my regular patients. During his physical therapy sessions, we developed a rapport built on mutual respect. You have a gift, Sergeant Mitchell, he told me one day after a particularly difficult session. You understand both the physical and psychological aspects of combat injury. That's rare. I threw myself into my work, developing new protocols for pain management during physical therapy and creating support groups for soldiers dealing with combat trauma. My commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Wright, took notice. Your innovations are making a difference, she told me during my performance review. The recovery rates for patients in your program are 15% higher than standard protocols. Meanwhile, unknown to me, my former teammates from the Special Operations Unit had been sharing stories of my actions during our ill-fated mission. Captain Davis, now promoted to major, had submitted a detailed account of my performance during those 48 hours to higher command. The intelligence gathered during our operation had indeed led to the successful rescue of the original hostages, plus additional captives, and disrupted a terrorist network planning attacks on American soil. 6 months after my transfer to Walter Reed, I received a cryptic call from the Pentagon. Sergeant Mitchell, said a formal voice I didn't recognize, please report to the office of the Secretary of the Army at 0900 tomorrow. Dress uniform required. My stomach nodded. Such summons rarely meant good news. Had something in my confidential records been questioned? Was there an investigation into the failed mission? I spent a sleepless night reviewing every decision I'd made during those critical hours. When I arrived at the Pentagon, I was ushered into a private office where a brigadier general waited alongside a civilian in a dark suit. Sergeant Mitchell, the general began. I'm General Robert Harris. This is Mr. Andrew Collins from the White House Military Office. My confusion must have shown on my face. Sergeant, Mr. Collins said, the actions you took during Operation Silent Retrieval have been reviewed at the highest levels. Due to the classified nature of the operation, proper recognition was delayed. That oversight is being corrected. General Harris slid a folder across the desk. You are being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed hostile force. The President himself will present the medal in a ceremony next week. I stared at the document, unable to process what I was hearing. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military decoration that could be awarded to a member of the Army, superseded only by the Medal of Honor. There must be some mistake, I managed. I was just doing my job. No mistake, Sergeant, General Harris said firmly. The intelligence you provided while wounded and under fire led directly to the rescue of 27 hostages and the prevention of 3 planned terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. 15 lives were saved by your direct medical intervention during the operation. Your actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Mr. Collins explained that certain details of the operation had been declassified specifically for the ceremony. The President feels strongly that your heroism should be publicly recognized, he said. As I left the Pentagon, still in shock, I faced a decision. Should I invite my family to the ceremony? Despite everything, some part of me still hoped for their approval, their understanding. After hours of internal debate, I sent a simple text message to my parents. I'm receiving a Distinguished Service Cross from the President at the White House next Thursday at 2 p.m. You're welcome to attend if you'd like. My mother's response came hours later. We'll check our schedules. Your father has a faculty meeting that might conflict. I laughed bitterly at the response. A faculty meeting might conflict with their daughter receiving one of the nation's highest military honors from the President of the United States. Eventually, they confirmed they would attend, along with my brother, their tones suggesting they were doing me a favor. The day of the ceremony arrived with perfect spring weather in Washington. The White House East Room had been prepared with rows of chairs for the invited guests and a small stage area where the President would present the medals. 3 other service members were being honored alongside me. I arrived early, my dress uniform immaculate, ribbons and badges perfectly placed. As I waited in an antechamber, I saw my family enter the main room through a side door. They looked uncomfortable and out of place despite their expensive clothes. They took seats near the back, my father checking his watch repeatedly. The ceremony began with military precision. Each recipient's story was told in turn, our actions described in formal military language that somehow failed to capture the chaos, fear, and desperation of those moments. When my turn came, I stood at attention as the military aide read the citation. Sergeant Riley Mitchell distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of the enemy while serving as a combat medic with Operations Task Force Stagger. When her helicopter was shot down in hostile territory, Sergeant Mitchell, despite being wounded by shrapnel, provided life-saving care to multiple casualties while under direct enemy fire. As the citation continued, I saw my family's expressions change from polite attention to shock. They had never heard these details, had never known what I had actually experienced. Sergeant Mitchell's actions directly saved the lives of 15 U.S. service members. Additionally, intelligence she provided while under fire was instrumental in a subsequent operation that rescued 27 hostages and prevented planned terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. The President stood then, a rare departure from protocol. He looked directly at me as he spoke. The citation doesn't tell the whole story, he said. Sergeant Mitchell didn't save just her team. She made possible the rescue of innocent civilians being held for execution. She helped prevent attacks that would have taken American lives on our own soil. Today, we recognize her extraordinary courage under the most extreme circumstances. He offered me a formal salute before placing the medal around my neck. Sergeant Riley Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying through the silent room, you saved more American lives than anyone will ever fully know. The weight of the medal against my chest felt surreal. The president shook my hand firmly, then leaned closer to speak privately. My brother was one of those hostages, he said quietly. Our family owes you a debt we can never repay. I blinked back tears as I returned to my position. The room erupted in applause, everyone standing except my stunned family, who seemed frozen in their seats. The formal ceremony transitioned to a reception in an adjacent room. Military officials, politicians, and family members of the honorees mingled over refreshments. I found myself surrounded by high-ranking officers offering congratulations and thanks. Your actions exemplify the best of our medical corps, said the Surgeon General of the Army, shaking my hand firmly. A group of civilians approached, introduced by a State Department official. Sergeant Mitchell, these are some of the aid workers you helped rescue, she explained quietly. A woman with kind eyes embraced me tightly. They told us what you did, she whispered. How you provided the intelligence that made our rescue possible. I have a 5-year-old daughter who still has her mother because of you. Camera flashes popped around us as media documented the moment. The public affairs officer had warned me the ceremony would receive press coverage, though certain operational details would remain redacted from public accounts. Through the crowd, I spotted my family standing awkwardly near the wall, looking unsure of themselves. For the first time in my memory, my father's usual confident posture was diminished, my mother's social smile replaced by an expression of confusion. My brother Ethan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. They approached hesitantly, clearly intimidated by the military and government officials surrounding me. Riley, my father began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. That was quite a ceremony. Thank you for coming, I replied formally, maintaining the emotional distance that now felt necessary for self-preservation. We had no idea, my mother said, her voice small. About any of this? You never asked, I responded simply. My brother cleared his throat. Those things they said you did, that was real? All of it. Before I could answer, Major Davis, my former team leader, appeared at my side. Mitchell was the best combat medic I've ever worked with, he said, not bothering to introduce himself. When we were surrounded and taking fire from 3 directions, she crawled across open ground to treat a wounded soldier, shrapnel in her own leg, and she still dragged him 20 yards to cover. My family stared, speechless. I should check on Captain Rodriguez, I said, seeking escape from their uncomfortable scrutiny. He's one of my patients from Walter Reed. Of course, my father said, his usual dismissive tone noticeably absent. As I turned to leave, General Harris intercepted me, putting a fatherly hand on my shoulder. Mitchell, I wanted to introduce you to the Joint Chiefs Chairman. He's heard about your innovative work with wounded warriors at Reed. I caught a glimpse of my family watching this interaction, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Throughout the reception, similar scenes played out. Senior military leaders sought me out for conversations, fellow soldiers treated me with obvious respect, medical directors discussed my treatment protocols. Each interaction further demolished my family's perception of my military service as something less than significant. Later, as the event wound down, I found myself momentarily alone when my brother approached. Riley, I owe you an apology, he said, uncharacteristic humility in his voice. I've been arrogant and dismissive about your service. I had no idea what you've really been doing. No, you didn't, I agreed, not making it easier for him. You never bothered to find out. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. Can we start over? I'd like to actually know my sister. Before I could respond, my mother joined us, tears in her eyes. When they described what happened to your helicopter, how you were wounded but still saved those men. I couldn't breathe thinking about how close we came to losing you. I tried to tell you about being wounded, I reminded her gently. You said I probably tripped over a tent stake. She flinched at the reminder. We've been terrible, haven't we? My father approached last, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. I saw how those generals spoke to you, he said quietly. The respect in their eyes. I've been in academia for 40 years and never earned the kind of respect you have from these people. I maintained my composure, unwilling to break down here. I should join the other recipients for the official photographs, I said, neither accepting nor rejecting their overtures. As I walked away, Staff Sergeant Torres fell into step beside me. Your family looks shell-shocked, she observed. They're seeing me for the first time, I replied. Want to ditch this place after the photos? The team is gathering at Ollie's to celebrate properly. I smiled genuinely this time. My real family, absolutely. As we posed for photographs, the president spoke privately to each recipient. When he reached me, he asked, those people who looked uncomfortable, are they your family? Yes, Mr. President. They're seeing you clearly today, he said perceptively. Sometimes people need someone else to point out the extraordinary person standing right in front of them. After the reception, I changed into civilian clothes and joined my fellow soldiers at a local bar where the celebration continued without cameras or formality. Stories were shared, some solemn, some hilarious. No one needed to explain the significance of what we'd experienced. Everyone at the table understood. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from my family, but I set it aside. There would be time for that conversation later. Tonight belonged to the people who had recognized my worth long before a presidential ceremony. The next morning, I read a news article about the ceremony. There was a photo of my family watching as I received the medal, their faces masks of astonishment. The caption read, "Family of DSC recipient Sergeant Riley Mitchell witnesses recognition of heroism." They were spectators to my story, no longer its authors. 6 months after the White House ceremony, I settled into my new role as an instructor at the Army Medical Department Center, training the next generation of combat medics. My experiences, both the classified operation and my innovative work at Walter Reed, had led to this position where I could shape the future of military medicine. The Distinguished Service Cross had changed many things in my professional life: accelerated promotions, new responsibilities, invitations to speak at medical conferences. But the most profound changes had occurred in my personal life, particularly with my family. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my father had appeared unannounced at my apartment in San Antonio, standing awkwardly at my door in casual clothes, something I'd rarely seen him wear. He asked if I would show him around the base where I worked. "I'd like to understand what you do," he said simply, "if you're willing to show me." That day marked the beginning of a slow, often uncomfortable rebuilding. My father, the prestigious academic, asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He watched with genuine interest as I demonstrated emergency medical techniques to a class of trainees. When a senior officer greeted me with obvious respect, I saw pride rather than dismissal in my father's eyes. "I've been arrogant," he admitted over dinner that evening. "I measured success by such narrow standards that I couldn't see the value in what you've accomplished." My mother made her own attempts at reconciliation, with awkward phone calls that gradually became more natural. She sent care packages to my new address, something she'd never done during my deployments. Inside one box, I found my grandfather's military photo and medals, items I'd never seen, displayed in their home. "Your grandfather would have been so proud," her note read. I should have made that connection sooner. My brother Ethan made perhaps the most surprising change. He began volunteering with the Veterans Legal Aid Program, offering pro bono services to help former service members navigate benefits and disability claims. During one of our now regular phone calls, he explained, "I wanted to understand your world better. These veterans have opened my eyes to what service really means." 3 months after the ceremony, I agreed to attend a family therapy session during a visit home. In that sterile office, with a compassionate but firm therapist, my parents finally articulated what had driven their dismissal of my military service. "I was terrified from the moment you enlisted," my mother confessed, tears streaming down her face. Every news report about casualties in Afghanistan felt like a knife in my heart. It was easier to pretend your job wasn't dangerous than to face that fear every day. My father, always more stoic, struggled to express his emotions. When my father came back from World War II, he was changed, he finally said. The things he saw as a medic haunted him. "I grew up watching that pain. When you chose the same path, all I could think was that I'd failed to protect you from that suffering." "You couldn't have protected me," I said gently. "But you could have supported me." The therapist helped us navigate years of miscommunication and hurt, establishing healthier patterns for moving forward. We would never have the easy closeness some families enjoyed, but we were learning to respect our differences and find common ground. During a Thanksgiving visit home, my first holiday there in years, I discovered something that shifted my understanding of my father. While helping him search for a book in his study, I found a worn magazine in his desk drawer. It was a military recruitment brochure from the 1970s, with notes in my father's handwriting. "Did you consider enlisting?" I asked, showing him the brochure. His expression softened with memory. "I was all set to join the medical corps after college. Had my physical, signed the paperwork." "What happened?" "Your grandfather talked me out of it," he said. "He'd seen enough Mitchell men come home damaged by war. He wanted different for me." He looked at me with new understanding. "I think I was hard on you partly because you had the courage to follow a path I abandoned." That Thanksgiving dinner was different from any other in my memory. My family had invited both my military friends and their academic colleagues. The table represented two worlds that had once seemed incompatible to me. My mother had displayed my medals in the living room alongside Ethan's law degree and my father's academic awards. When a family friend asked about the Distinguished Service Cross, it was my father who explained its significance with unmistakable pride. "Only 16 have been awarded during the global war on terror," he said. "Riley's actions saved dozens of American lives." After dinner, my mother showed me something she'd done in private. She had created a shadow box containing the news articles about the ceremony, photographs of me in uniform, and a map marking the locations of my deployments. "I should have celebrated your service all along," she said quietly. "I'm trying to make up for lost time." These gestures of recognition felt validating, but I had come to understand something more profound during our months of reconciliation. My worth had never actually depended on their validation. The president's words hadn't made me valuable. They had merely illuminated the value that was already there. One evening at the training center, a young recruit approached me after class. "Sergeant Mitchell, I joined because of the news stories about you," she said earnestly. I wanted to make that kind of difference. "The medals don't make the medic," I told her. "It's the willingness to run toward the wounded when everyone else is running away. It's doing your job even when no one is watching or understanding its importance." Looking at her determined face, I saw something of myself from years earlier, seeking purpose, wanting to make a difference. The difference was that she had begun her journey with public recognition I had craved for years. Would that recognition have changed anything fundamental about my service or my character? "Find your purpose," I continued. "The recognition may come or it may not. But the lives you save and the difference you make, that's what matters. That's what you'll carry with you." As I spoke those words, I realized I was finally free from needing my family's approval. The president's words had changed how my family saw me, but the truth was I'd already saved myself long before he said I saved others. Today, my family relationships continue to heal, boundaries firmly in place, but with genuine effort on all sides. My father recently attended a military medicine conference where I presented, sitting in the front row and asking thoughtful questions. My mother calls regularly, listening more than talking. My brother and I have discovered common ground in our different types of service. Have you ever had your worth questioned by those who should have valued you most? Have you found validation from unexpected sources that changed how others saw you?